All right, so welcome, guys. Have today Jim Durbin here. They call him the Indeed Whisperer, and I brought him here to help us with Indeed best practices, common mistakes, how to avoid those, and really how to really get the most return of our money that we all spend on Indeed. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, so I just want to get started first with how you got this Indeed Whisperer nickname, how that came about.
I'm a big fan of branding, and I've been working in RPO for the last 5 years. So I have a background in staffing, headhunting, recruiting, and then RPO, high volume. And we used Indeed for a lot. It's the largest job board that's out there. For
Yeah.
some people, it's the only place to get traffic. It's definitely the cheapest. But as they make changes and expand, as we have issues with demographics and such,
Hmm.
people have to learn how to use it correctly. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to test it across all kinds of industries, everything from housekeepers on up to developers. And over
Wow.
time, you just get really good at understanding the campaigns. You start
Yeah.
digging into it. It's kind of like understanding SEO in the last 20 years. There's no
Yeah.
one right answer, but what works for each individual person. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of companies, get really good at it. And, there's a community of people sitting around to talk about it. So really, really geeky stuff like S curves and algorithms. Not good for the average small business person to figure out. But the more we do and
Definitely.
share, the more people get to work, which is the overall point of it for all of us. How do we get more people to work faster and the right people, the right
Correct.
place at the right time? That's an old industry saying.
Totally. Definitely. Awesome. So I want to get right into the meat here. Is what are the common mistakes people are making today and Indeed when posting their jobs that you see constantly happening?
Well, the biggest is not understanding. You can't really just go online and search because you have to understand what you're using it for. So, like all software, you need to start with the end in mind. And the end can't be, I want a lot of people quickly and then not think about it.
Hmm.
It is a software. It has a user interface that you have to learn. Um, there are responsibilities. You are signing up to pay what they say that you need to pay. You are picking and choosing what your campaigns are. So if you're going to utilize it, you have to have somebody who's curious, who looks through it and understands it. There's no way around that. The good news is it's not terribly hard to do. It does
Hmm.
take time and testing, and you can't just turn it on like a spigot. Um, there's a lot of things that impact. Like people always want to know how much will it cost to do this, and how many people can I expect each day? And that's
Right.
not how advertising works. You can say, "Hey, I want to do a television ad, and I expect 50 people to call my auto dealership and buy a car tomorrow without haggling about the price." You could say that all day long. It's not going
Right.
to happen that way. And unfortunately, because people are so used to thinking of it like an Amazon or a Google, where you type in something. Hey, I typed in black shoes and I found black shoes. How come I can't find workers from home that want my salary? It's because it's not a spigot. So you have to think of it as a marketplace. You are going
Hmm.
in and you are competing against every other person, not just the people in your field, not just the people doing what you do, but anybody
Right.
who wants the kind of worker that you have. So whenever you're using an online board like this, the first is to recognize that it is a competition. So how much you
Mm.
pay matters. If you were paying well above, it's kind of like the joke about we don't have a pay problem in the country. We don't have a worker problem in the country. If they were paying $100,000 to work the grill at McDonald's, you would have plenty of people to work for you, which is true. You
Yeah,
couldn't stay in
definitely.
business, but if you're way overpaying, you don't have a problem Indeed. It's when you're trying to find people at the right one. So the first is make sure that your processes are in place, understand what the board actually is. It's going to give you people who have expressed an interest in that job. They're not going to be perfect. Some are just going to be clicking their way. Some are
Right.
desperately needing it right now. So the challenge really is, before you jump on any of these boards, are you quick and efficient and know what you want? Are you thinking that you can just select, that there's going to be this giant group of people out there just begging for your call? If you approach it like that, you're going to spend a lot and be unhappy. So the first thing is understand
Sure.
that you are competing with people with a board. So how are you presenting yourself? And that's probably the biggest one, is the expectation that this is easy. There's plenty of
Yeah.
people. I don't have to learn it. Um, that's probably the first one. The
Okay.
second one's a little harder though. So it depends on if you're a small business and you're posting on the applications, or you're doing an Indeed hosted job. So there's a huge difference between someone like me who has a career site and a database in the background. We've spent tens of thousands of dollars integrating what we're doing directly into Indeed. So when someone applies, it goes right into my database and we're calling them. There's a big difference between that and someone going and creating a job on Indeed. So there's
Right.
different levels of performance based on what you're doing. So if you're using their system to post, you're going to have a different strategy than if they're scraping jobs off of your site and then reusing those jobs off of your site to create a campaign. So you have to know the
Mm-hmm.
difference between those two. If you are posting jobs on your career site, are they posted correctly? Do you have the right titles in place? I think it was everybody picks on Subway for it, but if you think about a sandwich artist, right? If you go and you post that you're looking for a sandwich artist on a job board, today you would know what that is. But imagine the first day they did that. No one's searching for sandwich artist.
Yeah.
And so what Indeed has tried to do is simplify your titles. So we like to get really fancy with their titles. And I think about something like a housekeeper. So
Right.
housekeeper, what's the difference between a housekeeper and a housekeeping aide? Do you know the difference between it?
No.
It's about $1.30 for hotels because a housekeeping aide works in the lobby. Exact same skill set, just
Mm.
slight difference. How would any of us know that? Is housekeeper one word or two, Juan?
Right.
Do you know if it's one word or is it two?
I've seen it written in both ways, but I think it's
And
one
that's the
one word.
important. It doesn't matter what we think. It doesn't matter what we call it. It
Yeah.
matters what they call themselves. So if they're
True.
going to search the title, we all search by titles. If they're going to search the title housekeeper and you only have it as one word, you're only going to find the people searching it as one word. So if you're using the resume database and you're posting your title, you want to pick the title. It depends. Sometimes you want to pick the title that everybody else has to get the most number of applicants. And sometimes
Right.
you want to make it a little weird because those people don't get called as much.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite is house keppers. I wouldn't suggest pointing that out, but there are a significant number of house keppers out there. They just made a typo and weren't thinking about it. And you think, well, I don't
Right.
want somebody who doesn't write the right thing on a resume. But is that why you're hiring them? Because the beauty of those people is no one calls them because no one knows to search for a house kepper. So you have to think of this as user generated information. So what is it that
Yeah.
your population is looking for?
Right.
And the three things that people look for are title, location, and salary. So understanding what the job really is, it would help to go into Indeed and search like your candidate. What is the experience everybody else is having? Like we have
Mhm.
this issue with signing bonuses. There were the bonuses a couple of years ago for like Disney in Orlando were $2,000 or $3,000. They were insane. If you
Wow.
didn't have that as a signing bonus and you were looking, you weren't finding anybody. So it's like you need to do some research and say, what is everybody else posting? And then decide,
Right.
do you want to do the same generic things other people do, which is not bad? Or do you want to try to be a little different and just to be a bit more selective? You're going to get a lot less people. You may pay a little more, but are those the right people for you? And then the
Correct.
final thing is making sure when you're posting it that you're aware of what happens. Um, when somebody applies, like you should always apply to your own jobs. Are you sending them to a website and asking them to fill out 40 minutes of paperwork? Are you asking them to go to a site and meet? Do you have a recruiter that calls them and then they don't talk to them for the next 14 days?
Yeah.
If you're looking for hourly workers, non-exempt workers making less than $30 an hour, if you're not getting a hold of them at that first day, you're going to have a 90% drop rate.
Right.
If you're sending them to ask them to do more, like I need them to fill this out, whether it's OFCCP rules, I want them to be conscientious. What options do they have? I would say make sure that you're researching what other people are doing and then making sure that you don't have those gaps in your hiring process because you're paying
Mhm.
per applicant. You're paying for each one of these. Why would you let them slip through your fingers? Because you decided that whatever you wanted is different than what they want. If that makes
Definitely.
sense.
Total sense. Um, how important is the jobs or career pages, landing page per se, versus or sending people there outside of Indeed to apply versus
Right.
having them apply directly on Indeed? What do you say about that?
But the thing is, it's very fast to apply on Indeed. If
Yeah.
you have it easily apply, which allows you to just click that on and then because they have the resume, they don't have to think about it. And if you ask
Correct.
job seekers or if you ask consultants, they'll say this is great. It's all about the speed of application.
Right.
The problem is that how much time did they actually put into it? So it's a
Right.
spectrum of use, right? If I can just click, I can also click 30 other jobs. and I'm
Right.
not thinking about them. So it does
Yeah.
provide value. And if you can move fast and you have a good brand and a good salary, you can get a hold of those people. The problem that people run into is they're not thinking of it in those terms. You send it to your website. This is the scary part. A good website, like industry leading, is only converting 20% of the traffic that's getting there. Most are between 92 and 96% of that traffic is just not applying. So you're
Right.
paying to drive people to your website and nothing is happening because your application process looks wrong. So you have to decide. It's basically, if you had to get into a club, do you have a doorman? Do you not have a doorman? How
Right.
many doormen are you going to put? How many levels? Are you going to charge a cover charge? Are you going to decide what people? You've got all these different rules that are useful when you have a lot of traffic, but with
Right.
less traffic, you have to decide. But if you don't have any kind of rules on there, if you don't have your questions on there and such, anybody can walk in the door. So it
Right.
really becomes, this is why it's important to know. It's no different if you're using Indeed or anything else, or just if you put up a sign in your window that says, come work for me, you don't
Hmm.
really have barriers. If you put
Right.
up a sign that says text here to apply, you're basically saying you have to have a mobile phone, but how many people have their resumes on their mobile phone? So if
No.
you're truly doing text to apply, are you just trying to get a hold of someone, or do you need them to have their resume saved and uploaded? Then they have to look through that tiny screen. I mean, look at the number of applications. This goes back to tracking what you're doing yourself. Look at the number of
Hmm.
applications that you can't even read on the screen. And people see that and they're like, it's not worth the trouble. They don't care about my experience. Why would I? And so it
Yeah.
really does become that mix. It sounds really hard. It's not. It's pretty simple. We make it hard because this kind of thing, it doesn't feel like something we should all be doing. Because
Right.
recruiting seems really easy until you actually get into it, and then you realize it's not like purchasing a product online. It's talking to a human being,
Yeah.
and they have their needs, and you have yours. So it really does
Yeah.
come down to that. What
Yeah.
what happens when you go to your current site?
Yeah. I've seen that people in our industry in home cleaning, housekeeping, they do get better less applicants but better quality, because again, those people have to read through a website, have to go through a longer application, and really think about what they're answering. And the issue with Indeed Apply is that, yeah, many people can just click, 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 and they, but and Indeed sells us applicants at a rate. So the easier for Indeed is Indeed Apply, because they can sell us as many names of people as they can. So I see that for Indeed, it's a perfect business model, but for the small business owner, normally has to go through a lot of names that are unqualified.
Well, that's what they try to fix. So
Yeah.
moving over into what just literally happened in May, and it has been happening for a lot of small business owners for the last year, is they moved into the pay per applicant
Right.
performance. Before it was per click.
Per
So
click.
it
Yeah.
had to do with you were paying whenever somebody clicked on an ad. And now they're moving it to, yeah, either going to your website if you have an integrated campaign in a larger company, but if you're using their hosted jobs, they pay for application. So they're
Right.
trying to move to quality, and everybody lost their mind when this happened, because how do you define quality? How would they
Yeah.
possibly be able to find what you determine as quality? So we had to set those standards, and they've rolled it back a little bit. But this is why it's so important to really spend some time inside that platform.
Yeah.
Um, the new system, depending on it, you have your choice on it. But if you're picking per applicant, you list the amount of budget you're willing to spend, the number of cost of that applicant, and then you have
Mhm.
to review those people within 72 hours.
Yep. I've seen
So
that.
they've set these new. So the problem is people who were used to doing it the old way would post a job, they get a bunch of applicants, and for $100 they get everything they need to hire. Well, now they went back, they didn't make any changes, and now all of a sudden it was $1,000 and they didn't hire anybody. It was far less. Now,
Yeah.
technically, that's your fault. You looked at the system and didn't make changes. It did not go over well with most of the people that were doing it. So it's why it's important to know as you're going through and looking at that software. It's like
Yeah.
anything else that you're signing. If you don't look at the reviews on Amazon and you get a bad product, if you thought you were buying an expensive car and you get a Hot Wheels, that's on you, right?
Yeah.
So you have to take that time. And again, these aren't difficult, but it does take time and curiosity. It's not 15 minutes and you throw it up there. But
Yeah.
the application review is important. So let's say you and I posted a job this afternoon at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then we set a big budget because I want a lot of people, right? In the past, I haven't gotten it, so I want a lot of people. So 50 people come on over the weekend. If we by Monday, because it's 72 hours, so by Monday at 2 p.m., we have to have reviewed every person that came through, or we will be charged for it.
Right.
If we get there Monday because we decided not to look at it, we weren't thinking through it, or it's too many because we call the first 5 and we're waiting for them to call back. We don't know if they're good applicants or not. So that we go through and dump 45 of those people out. Well, and Indeed's going to shut your account off because you didn't really go through and review them. So it's
Wow.
important to understand that we just said we don't want unqualified applicants. They give them to me and said, but you have to do it correctly because you can't sit on these applicants, so we can't give them to other people. It's your responsibility to call through them. We gave you what you wanted, so you have to be on top of it. And it's very
Yeah.
hard for owners to do this because they're usually handing it off to somebody else, and then they get busy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe you just set it for 10, and those costs are much higher. Are you willing to pay $20 per applicant if you don't know they're any good? So
Yeah.
there is a cost to quality, and it's your time and your attention to detail that you have to play. If you want to do it the other way, you can set it up just by pay-per-click. But now there's other rules in place of minimum budgets, how many people you're willing to go through, or you're driving it to career side. So the options are there, but you have to be mindful in the way that you're approaching it.
Yeah, I see that the cost per application takes a lot of time for business owners to really review and approve, because if you got 50, 60 people, I mean, just if you take basically 2 minutes per person, that's a lot of time in a day just
How do you know
reviewing
if they're
people.
good?
If they're good, correct?
Right.
That's the
Especially if
problem.
you're small. If you don't have a giant recruiting team, how would you handle that? But if you got 100 people, you couldn't either. And so that was the issue, is how do we get – the truth is we are getting less and less people. Just in general, there's less people applying. As the market tightens up, there's less business. And, the solution is who's going to not blink first, but who's going to take that time to be successful? What is more expensive to your business? Spending that money, cash going out the door, or the time.
Right.
So we hear this a lot just in recruiting. A lot of people say, I have to hire right now. So you spin up your recruiting team. It doesn't matter if it's an executive, a developer, a housekeeper. I need to hire 50 people tomorrow. And then when you call, you can't get a hold of them for 2 weeks. So you did all this work. They didn't really need to hire. Their urgency was in their head, and then something else replaced that urgency. And then they'll call back in 2 weeks and say, what do you have? And you're like, nothing. No one's going to sit there for 2 weeks
waiting.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, there are people that hire and do well in these markets. It really is how, and we have to learn to change. Software is not going to solve all of our problems, and thank goodness, because if it could, then none of us would have jobs. It would be very easy.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what some people want. They want that one click to one hire experience, but then you have a retention problem. If you could take the same job with no impact tomorrow, why wouldn't you? They give you 10 cents more. Why wouldn't you do it? So be careful what you wish for. Be careful what you wish for. Ultimately, it just comes down to you have good practices or bad ones. I just don't think there's an easy button is what it comes down to.
Yeah, there's none. Okay, cool. What about, tell me about, I don't know, the 3 most important best practices or tips or hacks that a small business owner has to make sure they do in their Indeed account or the job post.
Sure. The first, probably most important one, is to understand your budget. You could set your budget in place. You needed to figure, it's a risk factor. How much are you willing to spend? Because you're advertising at an auction. You have to keep that in mind.
Correct.
What's the most you could spend and not get any results? You need to think about that. You're not just buying somebody and you have it. So what would you be mad at if you lost money? As it comes down to. And then what do you really need to weigh it out? If you were making, so if you're looking at your workers and you're thinking, okay, I make $10 an hour every time they're out in the field, that's $80 a day. If it takes me 2 weeks to hire and another a week for someone to start, okay, that's $80. It's $80 a day
times 10.
Yeah, times the 3 weeks. So you have to look at it and say, how much am I losing? So it really does come to a risk model. So you can't just, you have to look at it. What does that cost me in lost income? And what does it cost me to not have somebody? But then if I spend this money and I can't find somebody, how much. So it really does come knowing your cash flow and what you're spending. So
Okay.
planning that budget out carefully.
Perfect.
The second is having in place, knowing, do I know who to call? Am I asking for their phone numbers and they're calling them? Because no one answers their phone anymore. Are you willing to
No.
text them? Who's going to text them? Who's responsible for checking them? What do you really want in a resume? Do you have someone who, I like to look someone in the eye and shake their hand and I can instantly tell if they're a good worker? Well, what's in it for that worker? It's not just a job, because there's plenty of other ones. So the hack is making sure you have your process in place. So it starts with your
Right.
budget, knowing how much your cost you, and then are you prepped if I handed you, or if Indeed handed you 10 perfect people, would you be able to hire them? Because the problem is that if you can't hire perfect people, the problem is not them. You're still paying, but the problem was you. And then the third
Right.
one probably comes down to understanding how locations work. So when you post a job, it's the number of jobs you're posting, especially if you're doing with multiple locations and multiple jobs. I would focus on
Mhm.
one job, one location if you've never done it before. When you try to get more
Okay.
complex, not only do you spend more, but you can't really track what's going on. So really, you're trying to figure out, if I post this job in this location, what will it cost me and how long will it take to generate these? Now they have guesses. They tell you what they expect based on what other people have done, and you need to really pay
Mhm.
attention to those. They're not always right, but it kind of gives you a level. If I need to talk to 10 people to hire one, then how many people do I need to go through the application to actually answer the phone? So it's understanding, it's following the instructions on that, on their wizard that tells you how to build stuff, and
Right.
then making those plans. Just remember, your urgency isn't your candidate's urgency, and vice versa. So it's
Yeah.
being clear enough to know, is this working or not working? If I'm posting, I'm not getting anything, is it because I don't have a good salary rate? Salaries now, you can go search them by looking at other people on Indeed or on ZipRecruiter, just looking around what other advertisements, because it will estimate
Right.
that job title for you and how much you're spending. So if you can't get applications and you've got 15 jobs posted, now you have a mess and don't know what happened. If you start off with one and then build it and build some confidence over time, you have a reasonable expectation of how many people will apply, how much it's going to cost you. That will vary. Um, the first day of the month is the best day for applicants. And then the first day of the week, people get into a job in general on Monday, and that's when they apply.
Right.
So you have this big spike on the first day, and then a series of valleys and spikes down through the rest of the month. But
Hmm.
that's not true always, though. People also start looking if they lose their job because they have to pay rent on the first of the month. So it's understanding that it's a market that changes over time, but the more you do, the better you get at it. So start simple. Don't try to boil ocean. Don't try to solve all your problems. Get really good at
Okay.
one job, one location, branch out and get better. And what you'll find is your performance actually is faster. And then you don't have the risk problem. You're not spending a bunch for something that you can't do.
Awesome. I do have a question here. Also, I've seen people that constantly they have the free ads
Right.
and they're refreshing the ad every 2 weeks or every 3, 4 days. Is that a good
You
practice
can't
or
refresh
not?
jobs anymore. You haven't been able to do so for some 15 years. It is something that's in the back of your head because they always know, why isn't my job showing up anymore? That
Okay.
doesn't work. In fact, every time you do that, it forces Indeed to start over. They have an algorithm that bids and it starts at about 72 hours. So when you post a job, it's trying to decide where it's going to put that. Think of it as if you went
Right.
into a grocery store and you always know where to go to get your favorite cheese. What if,
Right.
when you walked into the grocery store, the only things on the shelves were the things that you wanted? But if I walk in, it's a completely different selection. So it's not just listed there. It literally changes for each person because they're trying to figure out, what ad does this person need, which means your job's not showing all the time. Now,
Oh
that
wow.
is important. Yeah, people don't realize that. Or, why can't I see my job? One, you don't want to see it unless because you're not the one looking for the job. You're going to get totally different jobs, right?
Totally.
The
Yeah.
so the free stuff is important because they will post your jobs for free. And a lot of people are like, well, it was great when I was doing them for free. Now that I'm paying, I'm getting less. Of course you do. That's the bait. Get them in. It's called organic traffic, right? And again, if
Yeah.
nobody else has organic traffic, then you're doing great. You end up doing this wonderful thing when you really start needing it. So it's called an incrementality curve. And basically what it comes down to is the faster you need to hire, the more urgent, the less pay, the more needs you have, the more it's going to cost, because that's what an auction site works at. So you should post your jobs to free to see what you get, but you just can't depend on that. If you really need it, you have to
Yeah.
pay. It's like if your friend's a plumber and he has time, he's busy, but he can get to you in 4 months. Well, if you have a leak, you can't do anything. But of course you're going to pay, right? If you want free work,
Yeah.
and then you don't get to complain about that work. Well, many people do. So look
Yeah.
at it like that. The more urgent you need, the more you're going to pay, the more you have to pay attention to detail. So, but don't be
That's
afraid to
amazing.
post your job for free and not sponsor it. You do get traffic. You just have to know
Yeah.
some of the rules that are behind that. And the only
Okay.
big one that you post is it's one job. You can't tell people to go to a job fair. You can't say we're hiring lots of jobs, because if you do that, something called the Trust and Safety Council will actually go through and pull your job down and not tell you. So if you're going to post a job in organic, if you're going to put lots of weird stuff like urgently hiring today, or we do a bonus or something, that can't be free traffic, because
Right.
you asked me I have one job for you. Here's a simple title. So if you're doing free traffic, the simpler the better. If you're paying for it, you can add stuff like, hiring next Thursday, flexible pay. You can add stuff into the title that aren't necessarily there.
Wow.
But yeah, the more you put into a title, or if you try to use plurals, like hiring housekeepers, that will come down, because that's not a job, that's an advertisement. And they're there for a job. They don't want someone to apply and then call and say, this was just someone looking for a bunch of people. That's an important
Oh,
one.
wow.
It's probably the most important one. We should flip that in the
Yeah.
podcast.
There you go. Awesome. Well, Jim, I really appreciate this moment that we have. How can people find you and reach out to you if they want
Well, if they're
to speak
looking for
about
individual
this?
consulting, that's probably not a good place to go. I work for what's called an RPO. So we have a
Yeah.
team of 4,000 recruiters in the Philippines that call folks, but it's when you're hiring 2, 3, 4, 500 people at a time, and you're trying to hire extra recruiters. So we do high volume. If you think of hotel
Wow.
chains or airlines or contact centers, nurse hiring where you're hiring a bunch, those are the kinds of things that we do individually. But if they just want to
Okay.
read about it, they can go and find me on LinkedIn. It's under Jim
Okay.
Durbin, JIMDURBIN. Or you can just
Okay.
search the Indeed Whisper on LinkedIn, and you can read what we talk about. Just be aware that what I'm talking about could be talking about enterprise or corporate, and might not individually
Yeah.
deal with you as a small business.
Yeah. But definitely what you share is super valuable, because a lot of people are really just don't know all these things, and it's, impacting their account tremendously.
Exactly. We just want to
All
get
right.
people to work.
Yeah. All right, Jim. Thank you for your time. And we'll see you in the next
Yeah,
one.
appreciate it. Thanks, Juan.
All right. God bless. Bye-bye. Hey, before you go, if you're planning on hiring and growing your headcount and revenue for your home service business, check out pipehirehrm.com.